Hello everyone and welcome back to another episode of Fintech Focus TV with me, Toby. Today I am absolutely delighted to introduce you all to Layla White from TechPassport. Layla, how are you?
I'm very good, thank you, Toby. Thanks for having me.
Not at all. Listen, thanks so much for coming on the show. We've got so much to talk about today. And actually, when I started reading up about TechPassport and seeing what you're doing, it's probably one of the subjects which I think has come up more and more than anything else over the last 18 months of doing the show, 2 years of doing the show, where people have these frustrations that you're going to explain a little bit more in a moment. And to have people who are working on this and trying to find the right solutions, I think is a fantastic thing. So I'm all excited to share this story. Layla, before we do it and get into the journey so far, how you're helping in the community, what your solution is, and a little bit more about the future of the business as well. Give us a little bit of background to yourself and TechPassport, if you would.
So I started TechPassport just over 2 years ago. Actually, it's getting off 2.5 years. Don't realise it's Christmas around the corner. And I started it primarily because I'd worked in banking for like 10, 11 years and always in vendor-facing roles, so procurement or commercial management or vendor management. So I was often the person that startups were negotiating against. So I was the procurement person, the dreaded procurement person. And when I was in my last tenure, I realised that the business teams wanted to innovate at pace. They wanted to try as many products as possible, fail fast, find the right one, and then progress quickly. I remember like my first few weeks within that role, and someone had said, "Listen, everyone in the fintech area thinks fintech's special. It's not. It's no different to procurement." And I thought, yeah, you're right. Going through the procurement process is exactly the same. There's no difference, but there absolutely is. And as I soon realised that with the business wanting to innovate at pace, the processes just weren't quite there, and the business was becoming really frustrated. And I realised it wasn't just limited to that particular bank; it was across the whole sector. And I think with my vendor management, vendor governance kind of hat on from previous roles, I thought actually this needs to be aggregated. It needs to have like a central kind of approach to managing this across the industry. And so I decided to jump ship and set my own company up. And actually since starting, I've now see it from the business, from the bank's perspective, the buyer's perspective, and now I see it from the supplier perspective, which is quite different, but overall they want the same kind of outcomes.
Absolutely, and I think it's one of those incredible things, isn't it? It is a conversation, as I say, I have all the time. I have it from when we speak to institutions. It's like they crave innovation, but there's this sort of bottleneck of being able to get that done quickly, which is just accepted, right? And then the easy thing to say to the fintech on the other side or the vendor is, look, this is going to take time. You have to deal with that. But there is a lot of pressure around having to deal with that when you've got a good solution and a burn rate that people sometimes just don't look at over how long it's going to take to get to that sort of phase, which leads to failure in so many instances around it. So it's a topic there which I know we're going to talk about how we solve, and we'll come on to that in a second. But first and foremost, you mentioned it there, nearly 2.5 years of starting a business. And having gone through that, myself a couple of times, I know the sort of challenges and strains and pressures of doing it. But you've done it in possibly one of the most interesting, I say interesting with inverted commas, times to do anything, because particularly with the procurement based I guess role or company, everything changed dramatically. Almost, what would it be, a year or so into having launched the business. So all best laid plans and all that suddenly come into dealing with the world being turned upside down. So I'm really interested to explore that journey with you and see, hear some of the challenges. And I know it's been something there which you've put everything into, and I'd love to just sort of unpack that a little bit and see how it's been.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. So it was about 6 months or so into the journey. So I think I secured investment in the December, and then obviously COVID hit February, March time. And we went from having at least one bank who was saying yes, 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 yes. And I said, well, I think lockdown's coming. Should we pause? Should I stop developing? Should I try and keep that investment money in a pot and leave it? And they said, no, we still want to do it. We're still fully invested in you. And then lo and behold, a couple of months later, everything stopped. Even other banks I was having really good conversations with, one of which went on to become our first client that we've signed up. Everyone's attention changed. Everything was focused towards being able to operate outside of offices. And so any view on innovating just paused completely. So I think for any startup during that period would have felt that pain and the frustration. And actually, Toby, an immense amount of stress is the only way I can describe it. But I think, coming off the back of it, I think other startups and innovative technology providers would probably agree with, is that banks, financial institutions, etc., are looking to this community to innovate, because actually it's demonstrated the need for digital solutions, digital banking, actually digital everything. And so I think it's a great time for innovative technology providers. And we've started to see a real kind of uptick in terms of engagement. But yeah, last year was particularly challenging, to say the least.
And that journey, I think, is so important. I mean, look, you mentioned there being timely. I think there's so much around this and this is a theme that we've sort of been looking at for the last 18 months, and all the leaders we've been speaking to on this show, is the ability to sort of ground through the difficult times and actually recognise that there's something here which can be shaping in terms of the products in the future and the situation of where we go through. But that stress is a difficult one to deal with, isn't it, when everything's on the line for that, and you've had the investment, that investment, as you talk to even about with your customers, begins to burn. It's the classic sort of handshake agreement on some of these things, which makes it very difficult to sort of press on and go through that. Talk to me about how you've managed that and the support you've had and how it's worked out well for you.
It's a really good point, Toby, actually, because I think it's well known, I would say that, or well known to people who've been through it, that startups will often pivot or often react really quickly to what a buyer's saying, especially when it's their first client, because they're desperate and keen to make sure that they can show some traction and they can get some sales in. But actually, there can be some real pitfalls into that, in reacting really quickly into what buyers want. And we made that mistake as well in the early stages. And what it means is that you're spending money, but you're trying to get that attraction. You're spending money on something that ultimately might not ever get any kind of attention. It might not have value, or certainly not in the early stages. So it can be super challenging. But with the first client that we had, we obviously continued working. We built the product. We spent a lot of money and a lot of time. And I think sometimes it's not clear to maybe the buy side or the banks or financial industries that to get to that point isn't just about finding the money to build the product, it's actually building the team. It's about, there's so many sunk costs that go into it that really quickly eat into your budget. And then, so especially when you get a no, or you get a not right now, which is quite often worse than a no, because it might happen at some point.
Maybe.
Let's talk.
Especially for an optimistic founder as well.
Oh my God. When you get, let's talk in 6 months' time. Oh my God. It's just, you can't say, but I need you to talk to me now. Sound desperate. You can't, because you're showing your vulnerabilities. But then equally, it's understandable that it might not be the best timing for the banks. And some of the conversations I've had with finance side clients, they're starting to understand the importance of being able to give an answer quickly, if it's a yes or it's a no, and not to kind of draw them out. Because those, actually, when you think about it, that impact to that business, it's not just that financial impact. It's also that, if I'm being really honest, I think it's also that mental impact as well that takes the toll on the founder. So I'm going to show my vulnerabilities here, Toby. But I think we all kind of know about it, and we talk about it in small circles. We don't talk about it openly because we don't want to be seen as or perceived as vulnerable or having any challenges to our potential clients. But it's for a founder, it's worrying about having the money to build, having the money to pay your team, to grow your team, to pay your own bills. And those delays that are understandable with the banks at the moment, in the current status and the current setup, they have huge ramifications, I think, for the startups and for the CEOs and the founders, just thinking, can I keep going? And it's not just can I keep going? It's, oh my God, I can't do this anymore. What am I doing? I haven't spent time with my kids properly for ages, and my husband's banging on the door going, go and get a job. And I can't go and get a job because the people that I'm selling to are the places where I go and get a job. So it's been really, really tough. We're coming through the other end, and I feel that's probably why I feel comfortable talking about it. We'll probably go through it a bit more, I'm sure. But I think it's important. I wanted to really talk about this and raise this as a challenge for startups to say, it's okay to feel like this, but also for anyone who's thinking about going into setting up their own companies, to try and do it with eyes wide open, really. And also, if anyone on the finance side understands as well, like these delays or these maybes, or let's talk in 6 months, really has a huge impact not just on the company, not just on the financials, not just on, the CEO wondering if they can keep their team or if they have to let go of their team, but actually on the mental health of the individuals. I think it's really, really important to sort of shed some light on that.
Yeah, I think that's so interesting, isn't it? Because the entrepreneurial journey is one that's been written about a lot, and people talk a lot about, that they'll see the glamorous side of it, of the success stories and the people there who said they've marched through the tough times and done the 20-hour days and all this sort of stuff going through it. And you see that you see a lot of the upside of that. What you rarely see is actually the downside of that, and the other sides too. And I think actually it's important sometimes that people don't hide that that sort of situation, that sort of reality, because and even when you're there as a startup business, that sort of desire. I remember when 12 years ago when we started up as a business, one of the things we were talking about to customers quite regularly was, look, we are here to work harder than other people for it, and it becomes an advantage as opposed to a risk. If you're there to say, look, we will go the extra mile because this means more to us, and it does mean more when you're in that situation. It isn't a transaction; it is, in some instances, a livelihood and a future and a destination. And I think when you're going through those things and people are understanding that sort of journey, they almost want to go to bat for you a little bit more. And I think that's that sort of balance between the two of them of being being real with people and then trying to sort of also put up this sort of veneer on the outside of what the reality is, can sometimes be a challenge, which is really difficult to go through.
Listen, Toby, I mean, I don't know anybody who is in business and isn't on LinkedIn, but let's face it, LinkedIn is fantastic. I mean, when I started using LinkedIn years ago, it was if I wanted to find a new job because I was a contractor, but it's evolved so much. But let's remember, like, LinkedIn is social media. And people will only put out there. Occasionally, I see some amazing posts from people who are being open about it and showing the vulnerability. I'm as guilty as anybody else. And so that's part of the reason why having this conversation here, it's actually, let's start talking about it and being honest. But it's easy to fall into the trap of thinking, oh my God, everyone else is doing well. Like, everyone's company is doing well. What's going on with me? And I think it's far more common than people probably talk about it on, certainly on social media.
There's a quote I love. Sorry to interject, just about exactly what you're talking about there, which is the natural element of social media and all this sort of thing, and say everyone else is doing well, and it's that is very rarely the case, that everyone by you is in that situation. And I think the quote that I read and I speak about quite a lot is, comparison is the thief of joy. And that whole concept there of constantly wanting to to look at over the fence and saying they're doing this or they're doing that, and actually when you start to speak to two or three other people, the reality is often very, very different, because there is this need to brand yourself and position yourself as the all-conquering, all-seeing, masterful sort of situation, and disguise behind it, sweep under the rug all the difficulty that comes afterwards. And I think if you're there and you have a network of people around you who are able to keep that sort of sensible, and your journey is I guess looking at exactly what's in front of you and making sure you're doing as well as you possibly can in everything you've got control of. That to me is one of the fundamental parts here of building a business. And what I love about your story is the 2.5 years that you've been in business has probably been characterized by one of the most difficult times to be in business of all of it. And that gives you a great platform then to be going on for. And that's a journey that you've been through. And now in that situation where you're starting to get the traction which you wanted for, it will give you, particularly in what you're doing, above all else, to be able to pass that message on to people at the right stage of their business, probably makes it even more of a necessity. There are businesses there that are nice to have, and there are businesses that are necessities. But if you've got people there who can help, improve that process for both bank and incumbent or provider, you have this incredible opportunity to walk the talk a little bit on it, and to allow them to move further forward as well. That must set you up really well as for the future too, right?
I hope so. I think it would be. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't in this to make some money to be able to pay my bills and go on a holiday every now and then. It's been 3 years since I think I've had any form of break. More than 3 days off is probably most founders find. But a huge part of why I'm doing it, Toby, is I want to fix this. Like, I want to help other founders. It's tough, but it's also tough for banks as well, trying to navigate this. And I think because I've been on both sides of the fence and seeing it from both angles, I feel like I'm in a really privileged position to be able to bring this together. But as I said, like a huge part of it is being able to support suppliers and startups and founders and give back feedback on like things that we've learned and how to improve. And one of the early things we did, and we still do, is we provide all of our templates for all of our policies, procedures, everything that you need to onboard with the financial institution is free. So we took all of ours and we stripped it out of all of our information, just made it vanilla, and we've just put it into the public domain. It's free. Because like, why wouldn't we? Why wouldn't we help other people? It's not going to impact on us, but it kind of really bedded in from an early stage for me and how my team has evolved in this whole sense of a community kind of feel. Because yes, we want to fix the process. Yeah, we want to make it easier for banks to find innovative technology and engage with them. And we want to make it easier for suppliers. But in doing that, it's about giving some advice and some support as well where we can. Because I think actually in helping the suppliers to understand how to navigate through the bank's processes, I think we help to make it easier and faster. And it's a bit of both from both sides, really. But it's very important for us. And I think that ultimately will lead to success. So rather than just having this SaaS platform, it's about building that community and building that awareness on both sides. So trying to educate the banks in terms of the impacts of delays and how what that has on suppliers. Also showing that to banks, actually, the processes that you have are cumbersome, they're challenging. I understand why they're there, completely understand. But if we can't change them, they're losing opportunities to work with innovative technology providers because of this micro and macro reputational impact. There's a micro impact where all suppliers talk, Toby. We're talking now, but all suppliers talk. All suppliers know who the great banks are and who are the not great banks to work with. But what you also end up with, Toby, is this macro reputational impact where you find suppliers will just not work with tier 1 banks or even tier 2 banks or even banks in the road to asset managers. And even if they've never worked with them before, they would have heard from other founders how difficult it is and they just won't go near them. So I think banks are really missing out on these opportunities to innovate. And it's not that suppliers aren't great. It's not that they won't be ready to work with them from a compliance and regulatory perspective. They just know that the lead times are too long. The process is too difficult. It's going to cost them a lot of money. And actually, if they do it, they probably potentially going to fall into that bucket of suppliers that failed with, before the 2 years mark is up because they couldn't get traction or they ran out of money. So I think there's a real opportunity to try and bring these two worlds together. But then also educate suppliers and understanding, when you're working with banks, procurement is often labelled in everything outside of the business team that you've first spoken to, where you've got your hook. Everything else is procurement, but it's not. It's procurement, it's compliance, it's legal. And so there are a whole host of things that you need to consider and map out a stakeholder map. Think about who you need to talk to, who's got a budgetary approval, who can get things across the line. And also not shying away. Like, this is one of the big standout things that I experienced when I was working in banks. Procurement are always left to the end before they're engaged. And if you've worked in a large corporation like the banks I've worked in and the procurement teams, they are there to support every department across the bank, like every single department. And so they are one of the busiest departments in my mind across a whole bank, because they're there to support everybody. So if they're brought into the process late, and quite often, suppliers don't want to engage with procurement because they don't want to hit any kind of bottlenecks. They want to progress as fast as they can with the business. But the later they're brought into that process, the longer it takes, because it's not just going to be a straightforward, it's done in a few months. Because not only do their processes inhibit it at the moment, but they're also super busy. They're really, really busy. So, from an educational perspective, it's like, get procurement involved as soon as you can. Like, don't hide away from it. Bring them into the conversations. That's one of my biggest recommendations, like bring them into the conversations, because they're busy. And I think they'll probably appreciate it as well if they're not left to, we need to get this contract signed in 2 months. They're trying to manage 20 other projects. So, yeah. I think that's so important, isn't it? That's we've had numerous different conversations with people over the years, and they talk about multiple stakeholders and getting lots of different information that's involved in it. But I think that sort of ability there because you're quite right. Look, again, going back to the sort of theme of sweeping things under the rug, people don't like to face up to the reality of having to deal with procurement, because they feel that could be the rug being pulled from underneath their feet.
But actually, look, if this process is going to be right, and you win friends in the right places, and actually treat everyone with the same sort of importance all the way through the process, I think that's a massive step in dealing with this, isn't it? And you're right. Look, I'm a big believer in community. I think community is at the heart of good business. We live in a similar ecosystem where we talk to end users and vendors and consultancies at various different stages. And the more you can do to bring those together, and make sure that there are challenges on both sides of the equation for this. There are challenges in terms of cash flow, in terms of information, in terms of all sorts of different aspects for the vendor, but also in terms of, for the bank themselves there. But the win is huge. The win is injecting a huge growth in the fintech industry by getting this aspect right. There will be a surge of innovation if this particular piece can come through from it. From the bank's perspective, who have traditionally been, in my mind, a little bit sleepy still on the whole benefit, and that's why it's taken a pandemic to really release the potential of cloud technology and cloud computing into the financial services industry as much as it has over the last 18 months, which is probably 4 years later than it should have done with the whole potential of what's been happening through it. The strangling of innovation, and as you say, the sort of exodus of companies who don't even go to it because of the associated problems, which then go into other areas of finance or even outside of it, is staggering. And that's why I think what you're doing is so important, and why I think it's there. So if you're to sit there and you say, look, a golden piece of advice, first and foremost to any vendor who you'd be speaking to, and then secondly to a bank, to say that this would be the main things that both of you can do to improve the situation, what would they be?
I might have a couple for the slides.
I'd be disappointed if not.
Like, one of the key pieces of information I can ever provide is, like, from day one, build compliance into your product. Like, build it into your product, build it into your team, build it into everything. And think about, like, how banks will want you to behave. Like, it's so important. It should be so integral into your whole team, your whole company, your structure, your whole product. Because if you want to work with a financial institute, a regulated company, then you will need to prove that you have an A-class, best-in-class product that can work with them. And I think that is often a problem for investors, like for big banks or financial institutions, because often they've said that suppliers can come to them green, but they don't know how to work with banks. They don't understand the complexities of working with a bank. I think it's really, really important. So really early on, if you're thinking about going into this and you don't know what to do, if you've not considered it, you must consider it, because it will hold you back. It will cause delays. First of all, in a business team recognizing that you have a product that works, or it could end up holding you back in terms of executing upon that contract or executing upon that service. Because you have to remember that the banks are regulated, and they have to make sure that not just their company and their products, but also their third parties and their third parties coming in are to a good level. So that's the biggest piece of advice I could give. And come to us if you want some advice. We've got some amazing partners as well, so we can put you in touch with people. The other thing I would say is really try and factor in enough time and enough money to onboard with these regulated companies. It's really easy to underestimate it, how long it's going to take. It took 2 years for us. It was exactly 2 years. And I remember when I first started, and I had this thought about building out TechPassport. And Toby, at the start, I wanted to fix the whole world. We will get there. We will get there. But
no doubt about that.
No, I want to build that whole contract negotiation tool from start to finish, because there's no way of mapping that process at the moment. There's no end-to-end process at the moment. And I met with an amazing mentor of mine, actually, at a very well-known bank. I won't say who he is. And he said, be like Jeff Bezos. Like, do one thing really well. Focus on that, get it right, nail it, move on. But also, he said, Layla, this is going to take you 2 years. You could lose your house. Like, I've seen people go through this where they put all of their time and effort into it. They ended up remortgaging their house. They lose their house. Like, it's really tough. It's going to take you 2 years. Like, no, that's not going to be me. Don't be silly. Thank you for the concern. He said, look, I'll get you a job. You can come and work here easily. You can walk into another bank and you can get a job. Just really think about this. No, it's not going to happen. Thank you for being concerned. But, it's great. It was 2 years. It was dead, and I didn't lose my house, touch wood. But being really candid, we ran out of money. Like it's, oh my God, it hurts to say it. It hurts to admit it. But, I recently had this conversation with my first major client. I said, this is what it's like for startups. Like, we ran out of money, and we were in the lucky camp because our angel investor could see that we had a contract coming. It was just taking longer. And so he gave us the money to get us over the line. But Toby, how many companies fall short when they know they've got a good product and they just can't get there because they've underestimated? And I underestimated. So I think the biggest takeaway really, other than the compliance piece, is overestimate. Like, put a load of fat into it from a time perspective, a cost perspective.
I agree with that.
And try not to remortgage your house. Just try not to. I can imagine how tough it is at times, but try not to.
That's the same as that in personal guarantees, isn't it? And
God.
Even when you look at the whole concept of like doing any building in your house, it's always going to be twice the time and double the cost, isn't it? By the time you finish with it, similar in a business perspective.
I'd say triple it. Just really, really pad it out. And 2 years. He was right. It was literally on, I think it was 1 year and 11 months. It was crazy. But,
sat there having sailed through that, though, you're in a good spot now. That's brilliant to hear. Which brings us on to the sort of next phase of the business. And you've done a great job so far. And I've got full respect for anyone who starts a business, but anyone who started the business and sort of grown it and gone through, what you've gone through at the start of it is fantastic, which gives you a brilliant platform to be able to do it. You've gone through those hard yards, and now it's about making the right calls to then move it further forward. And the next phase of growth is then about saying, right, next parts of investment, I presume, and what the future looks like. So let's cast forward to finish this conversation off. Talk to us about what TechPassport looks like in the future, what the next steps are, and how we go from grinding out the start to blitzscaling in the future.
It's exciting, Toby. It's really exciting. So we've got more banks coming on board, which is great. We've got interest across the US and the UK. And we're positioning ourselves with a few of these banks to be the voice of the customer, the voice of the supplier, basically, which is really, really powerful. We are partnering with global hubs around the world who have access to innovative technology providers, but equally we reach out to suppliers as well to join our marketplace and make it easier for the two parties to engage. But we're raising investment, so it's which is a tough time, Toby. It's like trying to, and if other people have been through it, you kind of you think, well, do I just focus on sales, get the money in, or do I invest? Because actually, unless you've got a consultancy kind of arm where you can bring in some money, you need the investment piece to grow at scale, but then you need to be able to show traction to show that you can invest. But they are both very time consuming. Raising investment, it's huge. It requires a lot of time and effort. But now we're in a good place. So we're raising investment now. We can demonstrate we've got market traction, which is great. We want to pad out the platform a lot more. We want to put a lot more information in terms of allowing the bank side, the business side, to perform further due diligence early on the supplier, and also to look at the compliance and regulatory piece a little bit, which would be quite interesting. And another really exciting area as well is we're expanding into the Middle East next year. So with a partnership deal that we have, the use case in the Middle East is slightly different to the West that we find. So where they're looking to access innovative technology providers, like proven technology providers, to engage them at pace. It's less about the pace, but it's more about finding them. So we're really excited and really hopeful about being able to offer them those suppliers and help to promote British suppliers as well onto our platform and build out this global platform to increase engagement, basically, and speed up that process ultimately, not just in USA and UK and Europe, but it's on a global level, really.
That's incredible. And what's this investment look like? I mean, who are you looking to gain traction from? If there are people listening here, what's the pitch?
I think everybody, well, most people would say they want strategic investors. And we do. Like we really want to work with investors who understand the issue and support us to grow. It is really important to us that we have that kind of backing. something that's really important to me personally is a cultural fit. So our team is culture first in my company, and I think the same thing needs to be for our investors as well. So really, anyone who understands this issue, perhaps anyone who's ever invested in the fintech and understands how difficult it is for them to engage with the financial industry, perhaps it's going to hit a note with them, and they want to see it improved and see how we can improve it and make it better. But yeah, so it's and we're open to angels as well. I mean, ultimately, we'd like to try and get the investment round covered off by as few people as possible, because I think we want to try and get that proper engagement on hopefully a regular basis. But yeah, it's exciting.
It definitely is. And so for people who are watching this at the moment, what's the best way for them to reach out to you? How do they get in touch if they're liking the sound of this and saying that sounds a bit of me, we need to find out a little bit more about this and chat to Layla? What's the best way to contact you?
Well, they can do it on the social media platform that we talked about. So LinkedIn is always a good one. Otherwise, it can email me. So I'm always available. That's at Layla, Layla at techpassport.io. But yeah, anytime. And even if someone just wants some advice, or if they want to join the platform, it's completely free to join as well. For suppliers, which is really, really important to us, Toby. It goes back to that whole ethos of community and supporting investors and supporting startups. So yeah.
Layla, it's been fantastic. Listen, I've got to say that we've done a lot of these shows, over 200 over the last couple of years, and I think this has been one of the most open and you used the word vulnerable earlier on. I think it's a fascinating journey, this, and the more people who sort of explain the ups and the downs of it at the same time, the better, because there's so much education from this. I think it's been a really important episode, but equally as importantly, I think it's probably been tremendously inspiring as well, and I'm really excited to see what you're doing. I do think, as I said to you at the very start of the show, this of all areas is one of the things that needs to be fixed most to improve innovation within financial technology and the financial services industry. And what you're doing, I think, couldn't be better timed or better positioned. So I'm really looking forward to seeing the rise and rise of TechPassport. Thank you so much again for putting your interview into the Financial Technologist magazine. So if you want to have a look at Layla's thoughts in more detail, you can see it in print at www.harringtonstar.com to go to download the Financial Technologist to read the wise words in there as well. Layla, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Really, really enjoyed it.
Toby, thank you really very, very much for having me. Really enjoyed it.
An absolute pleasure, and I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have watching at home. We will see you soon on our episode of Fintech Focus TV. Thanks ever so much.